In this third part of the image processing and image analysis workshop, we will start fresh with a new structure. So again, let's start Geodict by double-clicking it on the desktop. So I maximize it again, and then we make again sure that we select the correct project folder. So right click here on the project folder, click on select project folder and browse to the folder workshop materials 2023, in there to workshop image processing and analysis, and in there to the project folder. Make sure that the project folder is selected and click on choose. Now we want to import some image data, so we click on import to select the import GeoVol module, which is now the selected module, and then we click on browse. And in the project folder is a file called airfilter for um.grw, which is a geodict gray value image from a air filter. Select it and click on open. Now we're in the geometry import dialog, and in there everything is already entered correctly, because this is a geodict gray value image. It has all the information about the size of the data, and it knows also the voxel length. So we only have to click on image processing. So now we're in the image processing dialog. Maximize it again to see everything a bit better. And then I zoom slightly in by holding the right mouse button and dragging the mouse. At first I will turn the visibility slider a bit down up here, so that we can see a bit better what's inside here. So this is a air filter structure with fibers, and you can see in here that the fibers are a lot brighter at the boundary and very dark in the inside. So it looks like they are hollow, but in fact they are not hollow. So that's just an artifact of the CT scanner here. And we now want to segment this structure that the fibers are segmented correctly. So if I turn up the visibility slider for the automatic thresholding up again, we see that this causes problems here. So because the fibers would get holes then. We can also try to change that a bit by selecting the threshold manually. So we go here to segmentation and labeling, then under global thresholding select instead of the OTSUM method a manual threshold, and then you could try to improve the segmentation by choosing that threshold. So if I turn that up here, that's the wrong direction. If I turn it down, you can see as soon as the fibers are segmented properly, you also get a lot of noise in the pore space. One could get rid of this later by doing image processing, but this could be a lot of work, and therefore we'll use another method. Since this structure is quite difficult to segment, we want to use an AI algorithm for this. So instead of the global thresholding here, select the AI segmentation below. So if you have opened the global thresholding tab, close it, and then go to AI segmentation. I enlarge this here a bit to see everything better. Then in there we have several methods, like the default boosted tree, which works fine in many cases. Then we have the random forest, which is quite similar. And then UNet 2D and 3D models, which are much more powerful, but also more computationally intensive, and they need more training data. So we keep the default boosted tree method here. And below you can select the number of materials. You can keep it as it is because we have two materials in here, the fibers and the pore space. And then below you could also select the materials for which are then later used in Geodict. We can also keep them as they are. So pore for the pore space and a manual material for the fibers. Below you have several buttons. Here this selects navigation mode, which is the default, so you can use the mouse for navigation. Then there is the paint mode, so you can select this to paint labels, and an erase mode to erase labels. And now we want directly start with painting labels in here. Turn up the brush size a bit to 20, for example, and then I want to start by painting labels for the pore space. I have to select the paint mode then, so click on paint mode, and then I zoom in a bit, and then I paint in here some of the pore space. You don't have to do much, it's just important that you use the same amount of labels for other materials, or around the same amount. If you don't see the label that is painted, it might be the case that the visibility is still turned down for you. So turn that up here. And then I just paint into another place here. Turn the brush size a bit down, and then paint something in here. So that's something for the pore space. Now we have to paint some of the fibers. And so select here the other material, turn the brush size down to, for example, 5, and then just paint a little bit inside of the fibers here, there, and perhaps also this fiber up here. And now we try to train the model based on this. You don't need much training data. For training, you just have to click on the train button below the labels. Click on train and wait until the algorithm is finished. So that should go quite fast. And now to see if the results are fine, you can click on preview to get a preview of the segmentation. And as you can see, this looks already quite nice. I think we can stay with this. If you for some reason are not happy with the labels, you can also add labels, so paint something additionally, and then click on continue train, so you don't have to train completely for every labeling, so you can also adapt the training. If you want to save labels for later, or if you start training or start painting and want to do that to continue that later, you can save labels here with the Save Labels button and load them again with the Load Labels button. You can also save the complete model, so if you want to, if you have trained a model and want to use this on another structure, you can do this here with Save Model or Load Model. To make sure that everyone gets the same results here, I prepared some labels for you, so we want to load them now. Click here on the Load Labels button. And then inside of your project folder is a file called airfilterlabels.gld. Select that one, click on Open, and then click on Train again. So we can get the preview again, which is still nice, so it's quite similar to what we did before. And based on this we can create a segmentation. So that's fine, just click on Create Segmentation. This takes some time. The computers on which we're working here don't have graphics cards, so everything is running on the CPU, and this takes longer than it would take on a graphics card. So if you have one in your PC, this should just take several seconds. So now we're in the results viewer, and in there we can see what we did for the segmentation. So the method is shown, AI segmentation, and that's also shown what we did. So we trained the model, and then afterwards we did the segmentation. Additionally, you also get some information about the structure, like the voxel length, porosity, solid volume fraction, and so on. So we can close this result window, and we can also close the image processing dialog. And now we are again in the Geodict main user interface. Again, as before, you can toggle the structure on and off to see the gray values, or you can also toggle the volume field on and off. Now we change to the 3D view, and let's toggle off the volume field visualization to see the structure in here. If you want to see the outlines a bit better, you can go to the camera tab, click on show outlines, and maybe also click on show halo to improve the contrast a bit. And then we can see that the segmentation looks quite nice in here. Now we want to do some analysis on this structure, and for this we have the module FiberFind. So go up here on Analyze, FiberFind, select it, and then we have several options. And at first we want to use the estimate fiber diameters. No, sorry, the estimate fiber orientations option. So click here on estimate fiber orientations. As in all modules, you can edit the settings with the edit button. So select estimate fiber orientations under FiberFind. So again here, analyze FiberFind, then estimate fiber orientations, and then click on edit. First we want to select the result file name. You call it airfilter. Filter 4 micrometers fiber orientations. Then all solid materials is fine here. You can keep that selected. We're not so much interested here in the orientations tensor, so you can turn that down to 1. We keep the method here as star length distribution, but additionally we want to write a Geodict orientation file. So that's a file which contains the orientation data as a volume field, and we want to have that written. So click OK, and afterwards just click Run to run the analysis. So this is the results file. We don't see that much in here because we selected only one orientation tensor to be computed. So what is more interesting is the fiber orientation visualization. So click here to the fiber orientation visualization and then click on Geodict orientation file to load the orientation data. Click on load.gof and keep all the fields selected in here, and then just click on OK and wait until the fields are loaded. Now this is finished, we can close the result file. And now we see the structure and the orientation file. First let's disable the structure and the view to see more of the volume field. Now we don't see that much, we see a very large green block here. This is mainly because the volume field is currently visible on all material IDs, and we don't want to see the orientation in the pore space because there is nothing analyzed. So here under the field visible on material IDs, deselect the material 0. And now the visualization is selected as one of the Euler angles. This is not too interesting. Instead, let's switch the volume field. So here under volume field, color by, let's switch to angle to X. So then we get for all of the fibers, we get the angle to the x direction. So it's blue, so very low for fibers which are completely running in the x direction, and it turns to red for fibers which are running 90 degrees to the x direction. We can also threshold the data based on this information. So here under threshold by, you should select the same field, so also angle to x, and then with the slider you can then select which fiber directions are shown here. So these are only the fibers which are running 90 degrees to the x direction, and if we want to get more in there, more or all the fibers, you can turn that down. You could also change the direction of the threshold, so we can turn it in the other direction here. In the next step, we not only want to have a look at orientations in the structure, but we also want to identify the single fibers. Usually this is not very easy because all the fibers are connected in here, so it's not easy to identify the individual fibers. They overlap each other and there is no clear and easy way. For this we have a module called, or a submodule called Identify Fibers AI, which is based on an AI algorithm. So this machine learning approach was trained on a lot of structures created with Geodik, where we had the information about the individual fibers beforehand. And this model which was trained can now be used on imported structures. So to use this model, make sure that you select Identify Fibers AI here under Fiber Find and click on the Edit button. Now the window should open. First we want to make sure that we select the result file name properly. So I called mine here air filter 4 micrometers identify fibers.gdr, and then we can mostly keep the default settings here. So the identification method should be machine learning. We want to use the current structure and analyze all solid materials. And then we also want to keep the neural network, or the model which was trained for labeling the center line, which should work fine here. Below here there's the threshold slider. You should also keep that at the default. The algorithm or the machine learning model computes probabilities for each voxel, if this voxel belongs to the pore space or to the fiber. In this case here, probability of 0 means that the voxel belongs to the pore space, and the probability of 1 means that the voxel clearly belongs to a fiber. And for everything in between there are different probabilities. Since 0.5 here means 50% probability, it makes sense to divide the field here at 50. If the model doesn't fit very good to your structure, it might be helpful to change the threshold, but usually you can keep it at the default. Up here we also have an option similar to grain find to remove fiber fragments at the domain boundary. It doesn't make sense to use this here because nearly all the fibers are connected to the domain boundary, and this would just remove all fibers in here. Below, for the fiber shape analysis, we can select the type of the fiber, and we can keep this here as curved circular fibers because the fibers are slightly curved in here. Now let's switch to the solver options. I think this is important to mention here, and there's not much to choose here, but I just want to point you at the information which is shown here, which says that there is no suitable NVIDIA GPU detected on this computer. Usually such machine learning approaches run best on graphics cards, and especially on NVIDIA graphics cards. On such a card it's much faster than on the main processor, but the cloud workstations we're using here don't have graphics cards in there, so the algorithm has to run on the main processor. This means that it will be a lot slower here than it would be on a proper graphics cards. So that you don't see the runtime and think, oh, it's very slow. It's just slow because it's running on the main processor. If you want to run this algorithm on larger structures, it makes sense to have a proper graphics card for this. Then let's switch to the output options and make sure that Save Fiber Orientation Distribution as .gof is selected, so that we again get a fiber orientation distribution here. And now you can just click on OK and click on Run. Here on these computers the runtime will be around 10 minutes. Therefore I will cut out this part from the workshop video, because otherwise we would have to wait 10 minutes now for the video. But if you run it for yourself, you just know it takes 10 minutes and you can, for example, get a coffee during that time. So now the results file is finished, or the computation is finished. As always, the results file is opened. In my case here it's already maximized, and we can directly see in here that 341 fibers were found in the structure. Additionally, you get information about the orientation tensor. You can, for example, you could compare that with the orientation tensor we computed with the simpler algorithm before, but I don't want to go into detail here. I think it's more interesting to have a look at the fiber identification visualization. So switch over to the fiber identification visualization tab here. And first we want to have a look at the identified fibers. For this I load the identified fibers as a G32 file. So click on here. A G32 file is a 32-bit file which contains index information, so it has an index for each of the fibers in here. So there's just one index image in there. Click on OK to load it. Then there is a pop-up that asks you if you want to set the structure to invisible. That makes sense, so click on yes. So now you see the labeled fibers, and I think it looks already quite nice. You get all fibers colored in different colors, but there might be some cases where fibers are not separated properly, but as far as I see, this looks very, very nice in here. I think the algorithm might have some difficulties here where the fibers are crossing each other, but this might also be a boundary effect. So we could also crop in there, and yeah, in there it looks very nice. So let's switch back to the results viewer, and now we want to load the GID file here, the curved fiber fit. This file, as you will see now, we want to set it to visible because it's a new structure, and we want to deactivate the volume field. It looks very similar to the structure we had before, but now this is not the original structure, but it is a structure which consists of analytic objects in gedit. You can see this here on the left, that there is a green dot at GID object, which says that there are 341 fiber objects in the structure, and you could have a right click on this and could, for example, say edit GID objects. Then you get an overview of all the fibers, and then you could select one of them and, for example, change the diameter or do anything you wanted with it. You can have a look at all the points here, because it's a curved fiber, it has a lot of points. So there's a lot of stuff you could do with it. You could also go up here in the top bar, choose the button here with the circle for select GID objects, and then you could also directly select fibers in there, and you get the information of them shown here at the side, and then you could also change the material of them, delete single fibers, and so on. So for example, if I select this file here and say I want to switch it to another material ID, I can select a material ID, click on change material ID, and then you see that the material is now changed to material ID with the color green in here. So let's switch back to the results viewer. then you can see that there is a lot of more information in here. So you can, for example, load the labeled structure directly. So we get a structure with a center line. So the algorithm finds center lines. Let's open that quickly. As you can see in here, that's the original structure, and in there the center lines of each fiber are labeled. So for example, if we only want to see the center lines, we can deactivate the visualization of material ID 1. Here at the side of the 3D rendering button, you can click on the color and visibility settings, and then you see the visibility options and colors for all materials. And then we can uncheck the visible option at the side of material ID 1. So then we only see the center lines of the fibers in here. Switch that back on and switch again to the result viewer. Now you can see there's a lot of more information. So you could load the confidence field, which contains the probabilities which are computed by the algorithm, and then several other options. I think it's interesting to also have a look here at the geodict orientation file, so to see how that compares with the one that we calculated with the other algorithm. So again, we have to select under volume field that we only want to see it on the solid materials. And then again I switch to angle to X here for color by and for the threshold. And I have to make the structure invisible. So and then you can directly see that this looks a lot more smooth. And this is because it's now based on the analytic information of the computed objects in here. So if I threshold this one, I don't have that much noise in here, but just segments of the fibers which are shown or not shown depending on the threshold in here. So I think the time is over now for the workshop. You can now again ask questions, so I'm open for questions in the chat, and well, many thanks for everyone to being in the workshop with us. And if you're finished with your workstation, please make sure that you terminate your computer. So I just want to show you how to do this. So if you're finished and don't need the data in there anymore and want the machine to stop, switch back to your cloud interface and then terminate the workstation on which you're working. So click here on terminate and then click on the terminate button so that the machine is closed then.